Hi, I'm Shane.
And I'm Alex.
And this is the RPM podcast.
Thanks again for joining us for our penultimate episode of our 10 Days of Season Reviews. And this time we're talking about Red Bull. It seems a little bit strange to talk about Red Bull second from the end, because of course Max Verstappen ended up our driver's champion. But of course it wasn't quite enough points to take them to the top of the constructors table. So here we are, we're going to talk about Red Bull with their 585.5 points, taking 11 wins plus another 12 podiums. They had quite a few retirements this season for a team that made it to the top. That maybe cost them. We can talk a little bit about that as we go along. So diving into their season then, as we come into 2021, there's a real always the bridesmaid, never the bride kind of vibe around Red Bull racing. I think I made a joke during our 5 bold predictions where, because it was the second prediction, I think I was like, and talking about second, we're going to talk about Red Bull, which really hammered home the fact that they were always there. They were always in that second place, with Max Verstappen being the only one really challenging for the extra podium positions. That wasn't the case this year, of course, where it was all change. And their dominance in the previous era had kind of faded in the collective memory. And again, we kept hearing their sort of, this is their year, this is going to be it. In 2021, that turned out to finally be true. Now, Red Bull finally delivered with their RB16B, an upgrade on their previous year's concept. And this time with the changes in the aero regs, especially to do with the floor and to do with the rear of the car, their high rake, a very aggressive design was finally a really big asset for them. And that combined with obviously the generational talent of Max Verstappen finally delivering the Drivers' Championship that they've been waiting for. Now, if it wasn't for the Dutchman's occasional overzealousness and Perez's capacity to kind of disappoint every now and again, albeit much less than his predecessors, and a bit of bad luck here and there, they might have wrapped up both championships even before Abu Dhabi. I mean, that the potential in the car was there. And I think it's fair to say that the Red Bull, over the course of the whole season, probably was the better car, especially earlier on. Less so near the end, where it felt like Mercedes had made some big gains. They obviously had their spicy engine that Toto Wolff kept talking about. But I think over the course of the season, it was the better car. And fortunately for the fans, or unfortunately, I suppose it depends who you ask, they didn't wrap up both championships before Abu Dhabi, and we saw one of the greatest battles for the title across 22 races in living memory. It really was an astonishing season for everyone to witness, and part of that was, of course, because of what Red Bull achieved. Shane, what did you make of Red Bull in 2021? Was it, why? How could they do so well and yet not quite grab that Constructors' Championship as well?
Well, that you'd have to answer with the pair of drivers they've got and how they've got one driver who's scored more than double the other driver on championship points, which is where I think ultimately they've slipped away on the constructors' standings. But actually, they finished second place. And it's weird because when I was doing my notes for Red Bull as well, I was like, Red Bull finished in second place like they have done for the last, couple of years. It's a Red Bull second place. But actually, what hasn't been mentioned yet is they've scored 266.5 more points than 2020. So this is the step up that team has made in 12 months, which is incredible. It's the biggest difference in points across the whole grid and by some as well. So they've done an incredible job in getting as many points or getting it anywhere near that Mercedes team. And like you said, that car arguably and probably was the best across the whole entire calendar. They've just had some they've had a fair few DNFs, some of them their fault, some of them not their fault, Hungary and Bottas, etc. But also the pair of drivers have been quite far apart as well, and it's quite similar to Mercedes in that respect, which is why we saw this massive championship battle, because we've had two of the number one drivers be incredible in every aspect you could possibly imagine. You've had two second drivers who have scored almost the same on points. There's only 30 between them, and they've just been a little bit underwhelming. And it's hard to describe Perez as underwhelming personally, because he's had a good year. It's his first year in a Red Bull, and he's picked up that car better than any of his predecessors have since Daniel Ricciardo. So he's actually had a great year, but he's still scored less than half of what his teammate has, and that that's not very good. I mean, that's not as bad as Yuki Tsunoda and Pierre Gasly, but it's almost as bad. It's like that's the we're talking about points difference. It's the worst on the grid.
It's the biggest deficit.
It's the biggest deficit, not through percentage, but on points difference. So it's hard to. Well, it's Red Bull. They've had an incredible season. They really have, and they were so close to clinching that constructors championship. There's a couple of things Max Verstappen could have done potentially more, and not crashing, or not maybe giving up a position to Lewis Hamilton, and that works both ways. I'm sure I'll say the same with Lewis and Max in the Mercedes podcast. But there's definitely points lost through greed and through aggression. But Sergio Perez needed to pick up more points.
Yeah, it's when you think about previous incredible talents, you think about someone like Michael Schumacher, for example. Obviously, he had his teammates, whether it was when he was at Ferrari, obviously had Barrichello and Irvine. The distance between those two drivers was notable, but it wasn't quite as big as it seems to be between, say, Verstappen and Perez. And the same was true this year, the difference between Hamilton and Bottas. Yes, there's always been that very noticeable discrepancy between those two drivers, but ultimately the difference between Hamilton and Bottas wasn't as big as the difference between Verstappen and Perez. And that's the gap they really need to close if they want to make things a bit sort of easier for themselves overall. Looking at Perez's season, yeah, I don't want to be too harsh on Perez because he's stepped into that new car and has actually done very well. He's come away with a win that he got in Azerbaijan. Obviously, it's something of an inherited win, but he still had to get himself there, so I don't want to take that away from him. And with an extra 4 podiums on top of that as well. I still feel a bit mixed overall. He was always going to be outmatched by Verstappen. I mean, that's a given. Verstappen is a very unique driver. But it was pretty much an absolute domination for someone as experienced as he is compared to, say, the fresh-faced Albon or Gasly who came before him. 19-3 in the race, 20-2 in qualifying. He did a really fantastic job to help his teammate take the title, of course, and was genuinely crucial to the defense in that final round. That was probably his finest moment since his win in Sakir in 2020, is that defense in that final race, because that, as we talked about in the post-race podcast, that was probably one of the biggest reasons why Verstappen was able to do what he did, Michael Massey aside, obviously. But he also, he inherited the lead in Baku. He did present issues for Mercedes pit stops, particularly in France and Mexico. So he was there doing what his predecessors couldn't do and keeping within that range in order to, make it less easy for Mercedes to have options with their pit stops, etc. But, he was bringing home an all right number of points on the regular, but I'm struggling to think of any really big highlights other than a couple of his defenses, considering how good the car clearly was. In qualifying, he only put it in the top 4 8 times and was regularly threatened and sometimes beaten by Gasly in the sister AlphaTauri. He turned a brilliant P2 start at Imola into P11 after going off in the gravel and then overtaking other cars under the safety car.
Yeah,
I mean, a complete rookie error. I mean, surely he knows you can't overtake under the safety car. You can lose positions under the safety car, but
which he did.
Which he did, but you can't gain them back again. And that obviously earned him a stop-go penalty. He binned it on the way to the grid in Belgium, throwing away what would have just been some free points. His second half of the season was much, much better. He was a little unfortunate in the final 2 rounds. So it's a bit mixed for Perez. I think with a clean slate regulations next year, we'll see if he can bring the fight a little bit closer to his teammate, because he's obviously a very capable driver. He's well known for his good tyre management. He's got loads of experience now. And he feels very much at home in that team in the way that Albon and Gasly never did. So I think that it's still a very exciting prospect going into the new season, but there's a considerable deficit to be overcome nonetheless.
And it's a notable deficit as well. And that's what sticks out for me. It's really hard to talk about Perez because he's had a fantastic year in the terms that he's gone into that car and he's picked up straight away and scored really good points this year. But when you compare him to the Mercedes drivers, he lost out to Bottas by 30 odd points. Obviously, he was 190 or 200 points behind his teammate, which is a huge amount. So despite these fantastic finishes, he just a little bit too inconsistent. And that's fine because it's his first year in the Red Bull and there's a lot of pressure in that seat because look at the history. Look at the history of that seat. You're going to go into that seat and you're going to be worried about your job straight away. And you can see that as the season went on, he clearly got more comfortable and he started scoring consistent podiums, dropped into P4 a couple of times and dropped into P5, but a lot of podiums. It was a good season, but just wasn't good enough. It needs to be excellent. When you're driving for Red Bull, you need to have excellent seasons. You can't just have good seasons. And he's had a good season. And that's probably the nicest way to describe Perez's season. It was just good.
Yeah, good but not exceptional, which is the latter is really what they need. Speaking of exceptional, let's talk about Max Verstappen. Wow. Obviously 395.5 points, sealing him the championship, 10 wins with another 8 podiums on top of that, which means 18 races he was nothing less than P2.
Yeah.
Absolutely incredible. Obviously, first off, congratulations to him for winning his much-deserved first World Championship. He was, for me, easily the best driver on the grid this year, and I think his results speak for themselves. He broke the record for the most podiums in a season. He failed to be P1 or P2 just 4 times, and only once was it really his fault, I think. The most frustrating thing with talking about Verstappen's campaign, of course, especially when his aggressiveness and his uniqueness as a driver is brought up, is that very often he doesn't need to do the controversial things that he does because he's just so outrageously fast and consistent. He doesn't need to make some of the moves that he does. And Italy was the perfect example of this frustration because, as we talked about at the time, despite not being ahead at any point going into the corner, he does what he's done many times before and just throws it round on the outside anyway and insists on being left space when he doesn't really feel like he's earned it at that point. Most cars, if they're ahead for the entire time, if you haven't even got alongside into the braking zone, it's reasonable to expect the car ahead to take that racing line. And what Max Verstappen has done is he's tried to throw a lot of ambiguity into this understanding by saying, well, if I can throw it up alongside going into the corner, despite not being ahead at any point, I deserve space. Now you've got to give me room. And I think, I got to say, I don't agree with that. Just as a matter of kind of my personal kind of racing opinion, I think that that's just a very unnecessarily rash way to race. And crucially, he doesn't need to do that. He doesn't need to. He's really, really fast and really, really talented and can already overtake in multiple other ways. So Italy was kind of the perfect example of how, what do you expect if you're going to race that way? You're being too aggressive. And I think that he was also very unlucky. But incidents like that, that's what can lose you the championship. Sometimes it pays to be just a bit more patient. It's easy to romanticize this, well, if you no longer go for the gap kind of thing. I think it's important to put Senna's quote in full, because what Senna said was not just if you no longer go for a gap. He said, if you no longer go for a gap that exists.
Yes, yeah.
You are no longer a racing driver. And I think whether or not it exists is up for interpretation. But obviously, I don't want to start binning on Verstappen because, as I've already said, he was the best driver over the course of the season. Baku obviously wasn't his fault. That should have been a pretty comfortable win for him. He has some responsibility for the Silverstone incident, but not as much as Hamilton, in my opinion. And Hungary, he did very well to even put it in the points after the chaos. Left him without a barge board. His barge board was completely missing, and he still managed to put it in P9. A bit more calculated risk-taking and some better luck, and he'd have had that championship wrapped up long before Abu Dhabi, I think. Suffice to say that Verstappen's incredible speed and skill have finally been rewarded, and we keep seeing him doing these amazing things with the car that's just about on par at times with the Mercedes, and now they've given him a car that he can challenge with, and he's done what he's been asked to do. If he continues to go after the title, which I think he will, there's a little bit of downplaying on his part. I think there's a little bit of, well, I've got a championship now, but I think he'll still keep going for it.
That's the safe thing to do, though.
I suppose so. Yeah, you don't want to hype yourself up for more championships
no.
when you've only just got your first. But yeah, hopefully we'll be in for yet more years of great entertainment with him fighting at the front, because if nothing else, he is an incredibly entertaining racer.
I think what separates Verstappen as from Hamilton is that if you take out Verstappen's DNS, which you've just talked about, and if you take out his P9 finish in Hungary, which was remarkable that car didn't not finish. Like the fact that he had so much of his car missing and he still managed to pick up 2 points, fantastic drive. So we take out that P9. His worst result was P2. Like that's mad. That's crazy. Can we just comprehend how well this driver has done? That actually take out the instance where he's not finished a race and the P9, which wasn't his fault at all. His worst place finish was P2. Compare that to Hamilton, and off the top of my head, I'm pretty sure Hamilton has DNF'd a couple of times, but also he's finished P5. He finished P7 in Monaco, P15 in Azerbaijan, which was his fault, P5 in Turkey, and P3 in Belgium. Max didn't even score a P3. Like, that's how good he was this year. Austria, P4 for Lewis. And these results, if we were talking about Lewis winning the championship and saying that he's won, I think it's 8 races this year, and with half a dozen podiums and the odd occasional P4 and P5, we would have gone classic world champion material. And we're talking about Max Verstappen, whose worst place finish, where he actually crossed the line, where he wasn't hit and taking out half his car, is P2. You've got to give the guy all the respect he deserves. And, I've loved Hamilton winning the last couple of years, and I think it's great. I'm British, and I like to see a British driver do well. But I tell you what a championship fight. And I'm glad Max won it because he deserved to win it, because he was the better driver throughout the whole entire season. The consistency was unbelievable. Like, if we get to see this kind of consistency next year, we're in for a treat again, because P1, P2, P1, P2, P1, P2. It's crazy stuff. It really is. You could talk about this forever, but yeah, what a year from Max Verstappen. What a year for Red Bull, closing down. Obviously, we're talking about the constructors now, closing down the Mercedes and only narrowly missing out. And there's not much else you could have done. There's not much else you could have asked Max to do to make a difference in the Constructors' Championship. It was all arguably down to Sergio Perez, and I'm sure and I hope that will come in 2022.
Yeah, well, next year, of course, Verstappen goes into the new season as defending champion. And
with the one.
That's right. Yeah, he's gonna use the number one, which is nice to have that number one back on the grid. And Red Bull missed out on the Constructors' Championship by just 28 points. There's not a huge amount in it, really. So they'll be hungry to retain one title and try and grab the other from Mercedes if they can. I think what they need overall as a team is a much stronger start to the season. That's always where they seem to fail, is that they start off and over the course of the season, Red Bull gets stronger and stronger. And eventually Mercedes kind of reassert their dominance by just being stronger over the whole course of the season. Now, 2021 was a little bit different because Red Bull from the off had a very, very similarly competitive car. But at the beginning of the season, I think Lewis won 3 of the first 5 races. So
he did, yeah.
It was still a stronger start for Mercedes, and then eventually Verstappen started, bashing out the wins. So what they need to do is they need to come into the first race and really assert themselves. And obviously that's what they're trying to do, and it's what they want to do. But that's the one thing that's kind of been missing for Red Bull, is that initial, straight from the off, sort of affirming result. And they almost got it in Bahrain. Obviously Verstappen had to give the position back ultimately, and that's what lost them their sort of exciting first win. If they can just nail a win right at the beginning of the season, it'll feel like a slightly more comfortable start for them. But whatever happens, I think that the Red Bull versus Mercedes challenge, as if we're lucky, is only just begun. Because and hopefully some more teams will get involved as well, because we've got 2 teams here who are going to be really, really hungry to both attack and defend for the title. So it's super exciting going into the new year.
Well, there we have it. That is Red Bull's 2021 season. So close to beating Mercedes on the Constructors' Championship, but they are day 9 of our 10 days of season review. Maybe next year they'll be at day 10 and take that take that top step along with what might be another Drivers' Championship as well. Oh, so exciting. But thank you very much for listening. If you've liked the episode, please be sure to give us a like rating. Give us a like or a rating. And if you've enjoyed this episode, then please consider subscribing for more wherever you get Race Per Minute. And if you really want to support the show, you can do and help keep the quality content coming by donating as little as £1 a month at patreon.com/RacePerMinute. We've done 9 teams. We're moving on to Mercedes, which is slightly strange because we've just talked about the championship winner, the Drivers' Championship winner. And now we're going to go talk about Mercedes, who won the Constructors' Championship. But everyone seems to focus on the Drivers' Championship, don't they? And we always forget about how well, a team has done. But not us. We shall move on to Mercedes and we'll talk about what an incredible season they've had to take their 8th Constructors' Championship. And I hope you join us for the next one.
See you then.